Hi, we're Brett and Amit from Data People. And today we're going to talk about 5 ways you can instantly improve the quality of your inbound candidate pool. This is a matter that's affecting hundreds and thousands of companies today, especially as the market's changing. And we wanted to give you tips that you can incorporate right away to make your life easier and to get better quality candidates and fill your jobs faster.
I'm super excited to talk about this, Ahmed. As you know, we have a number of open recs, and we have put into practice some of what we're preaching here, and we've seen some tremendous impacts from it with regards to the quality of candidates that are coming in, but also their excitement level. Just speaking to them and understanding how what we've done here and what we've outlined here really encourages them to invest in understanding and hopefully aspiring to join Data People. It's great to see. So excited to share some of those firsthand experiences.
I completely agree, Brett. I mean, that makes it's there has never been a better time to hire inbound. It's cheaper, it's more representative, you've got more diversity in those candidate pools, it works faster, but sometimes it can be overwhelming when you get thousands of candidates. Um, Today, we're going to talk exactly about how do you deal with that? How do we make sure we don't get thousands of candidates, but rather you get the right, robust, diverse, highly qualified candidate pool you need so that you can make those hires really quickly, really effectively, and almost completely free. So let's start a little bit about your speakers today. My name is Amit Bhatia. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Data People, a recruiting intelligence company. It's been, and what we do is we bring science to hiring. We look at the jobs of 75 million jobs and outcomes from 40,000 companies around the world. And we're constantly evaluating trends and signals to give you, our users, our customers, and our audience tips to really bring scientific interventions to massively improving the fairness and the efficiency of your hiring practices. Brett, a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I am really excited to have recently joined Data People. Just about a quarter in, I lead our marketing efforts, and what Ahmed just did a little bit of the heavy lifting, describing what we do. But what we do is why I joined. I was, as a hiring manager, I've experienced the frictions and the pains that hiring managers face when trying to hire in today's world. It feels slow. It feels disconnected from outcomes. It doesn't feel data informed. And this is not our talent acquisition partners' fault. They're severely limited in many circumstances with regards to what they can do and how great they can make the experience for candidates and how great they can make the experience for their hiring team partners. And so I'm super excited to step in and learn about the space, learn from the market, and learn from experts like you, Amit, but also help the market understand that there is a better way. They don't need to settle for what has always been done in today's world of accessible data, collaborative workflow platforms. So that's why I'm excited. And this conversation about inbound talent is a core demonstration of how making some of these small improvements with or without a platform like Data People, hopefully with, admittedly, but with or without a platform like Data People, you can make a tremendous impact on your teams, your business, and your talent pools.
And Brett, as a marketer, I imagine that you appreciate how marketing dealt with this exact same problem about 10 years ago when we started to see a huge volume. Google unlocked all of this inbound leads and inbound funnels for marketers. But a really big problem then became how do you get signal? How do you get intent? How do you drive quality? And we're kind of, as recruiting teams, we're now grappling with those same exact problems.
Yeah, you what we are. And I think, figuring out how to take advantage of the chaos and really not just survive it, but really thrive in this environment is going to be a massive win for talent acquisition teams, a massive tailwind for businesses as they continue to scale growth, especially with macroeconomic conditions strengthening.
So let's get to it. Look, it's no surprise with the conditions, the volatility, the vibe session we're in. And some of the layoffs, inbound candidate pools are growing really, really rapidly. And inbound has been, for a lot of companies, the bread and butter of hiring. Some companies, use sourcing a lot, but now those inbound pipelines, you're getting incredibly qualified, talented professionals, from in every possible job type, from engineering to sales to marketing to every part of the enterprise. But sometimes we're getting sort of, it's like suddenly it's like drinking like from a fire hose because the volume is picking up, and our data shows it. Nearly every seniority, every role type since 2021, which was an incredibly tight labor market, the candidate pools have almost doubled. And where this is really acute is in remote jobs. So if you're posting a job that's remote today, especially, chances are you're seeing 3 to 4x the volume that you were seeing a year ago. That can be a really exciting thing if you were starved for candidates a year ago. It could really be something that unlocks much faster and much cheaper hiring. But it's sometimes for talent teams that are also starting to have to be more efficient, this can be overwhelming. How do I deal with it? And in a world where LinkedIn and Indeed and all the major job search platforms have made one-click apply so easy and ubiquitous, sometimes you end up with scenarios where you're getting so many unqualified candidates, people who don't even work in the geography that you want them to work in, or don't have anywhere near sort of the skills or qualifications that you're looking for. And so part of the question and the temptation for recruiters sometimes is, let's throw all of those away and let's start focus just on specific channels, agency hiring, sourcing, referrals. And that's a mistake, because the saying goes, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You've got incredible candidates coming through to you organically for free. How do we find a way to improve the signal and reduce the noise and make it easier? Because it's a lot easier to sift through 100 resumes looking for 20 great resumes than it is to go outbound to try to source 20 candidates and get them to come join your company. However, the problem becomes really acute if you're looking for 20 out of 1,000. And today we're going to talk to you about how do we get the signal to noise ratio really right. So we have 5 simple tips that you can actually incorporate today. So let's start with tip number 1. Diagnose your inbound pass-through rates. This is your most important. Before we get into this, let's talk about what is a pass-through rate. Your pass-through rate is the candidates that are advancing through your funnel were divided by total candidates in stage. And this gets used interchangeably. So, what sometimes we talk about pass-through rates as like the total number of hires divided by the total number of candidates. And if you look at it from that perspective, a really good pass-through rate today is about 1%. So out of 100 applicants, you should be able to make a hire. That likely means, how many candidates coming through qualified. Now, a different way people use pass-through rates is the number of candidates that made it through the initial resume screen or application review, and you decided to invite to your phone screen process. That should be closer to 10%. So you should be able to see at least 10% of your candidates coming through that you look at their resumes and they're like, yep, they're qualified for this job. I want to get on a phone screen with them. And that gives you, if you've got 100 plus candidates applying and 10% pass-through rate, your odds of filling a job within 30 to 45 days skyrockets. Gives you the predictability and power that you deserve to have as talent leaders. And what beautiful part about the pass-through rate is it measures the quality and it really impacts all of your core metrics. So it's the metric to really pay attention to. Now, my question to you, our audience, is going to be, do you have this number at your fingertips? Does your most ATSs, whether you're using Workday, Greenhouse, iCIMS, Taleo, whichever ATS you're using, typically allows you to measure this number. Might be hard, but you want to have that number. You want to track that number quarter over quarter. You want to track that number year over year. And you also want to have that number for all of your major hiring funnels, your engineering hiring, your sales hiring, your CS hiring. Those numbers might be a little bit different for the different hiring funnels, but really understanding the trends, because it allows you to capacity plan, allows you to plan your budgets and be effective with it. If you're having an overall pass-through rate less than 1%, it's time to intervene. So if you're getting 400, 500 applicants to make a hire, this is a problem. This puts a huge burden on you, the recruiting team, to serve. It puts a burden on your hiring managers. It ends up taking a lot longer to fill. This is where you want to start to think about signal to noise ratio. So if you're above that, congratulations. Maybe the rest of the presentation isn't as applicable for you. But if you're below that, if you're seeing a pass rate below 1% or a pass through from application review to screening of less than 5%, we've got to start to intervene right away. Brett, as you're thinking about the roles you've been hiring for recently, how do you think about pass-through rates? Has this been showing up in the way you look at this?
It's a great question. And it's a hard question to answer because I think, to your point, depending on your instrumentation, sometimes you can't measure this with a degree of accuracy and validity and confidence. And reflecting on sort of hiring over the past 15 years, the best talent partners that I've had have been those that have been able to explain not only what that pass-through rate was, but how can we influence it? How can we understand the ingredients that go into it that drive it? And that is what truly makes that magical recruiting and hiring and efficiency process. It also allows us to diagnose issues with fairness and equity in our process. And so there's a lot wrapped up into this. It isn't always easy. And I can attest from sitting with some of my talent partners to try and pull it out of some of the ATSs that they have worked with. It isn't always easy, but it is so instrumental. And that's why I think it's important to highlight this as our first one. It is something that you should be actively sharing with your hiring managers. You should be actively sharing with your business partners. And it's one that can really define and guide the work to be done.
And if you're having to pull this from a spreadsheet, chances are you're not going to be looking at this frequently enough. This is where that's why we built pass-through rates as such a core part of Data People Insights. So, because we believe every single company deserves the right to have this information filterable, digestible, real time at their fingertips without ever having to touch a spreadsheet. So let's talk about tip number 2.
All right, tip number 2, location matters, even if your job is remote, which is a curious consideration, really. I mean, if you're posting a remote job, why can't you just post it once and let it live everywhere? That would seem logical, but the reality is LinkedIn, Indeed, even candidates view those differently. They view a remote job that is posted for a geographic region of Lisbon differently than a global remote job. And they'll prioritize how it's viewed within the platform accordingly. The other interesting thing that I certainly was unaware of before joining Data People, but we've seen proven time and time again in our own experiences and in our data and our customer experiences, is that candidates react differently. They think about the job differently. They approach the job differently. If it's a remote role, even if it's a remote role for the San Francisco Bay Area, I, as a candidate, before joining Data People, reviewed that very differently than a global remote role. And that is, in some ways, unintuitive. And quite frankly, Amit, I know I've talked to you about this before when I was posting my role. It adds work. Like it is a little bit. It's not that much more work, but it's a little bit more work. And so, would love to get your sense of, just as you've thought about this, how have you talked to our customers about embracing this way of thinking? Because this is counterintuitive to, in some ways, on the surface, driving efficiency. It's also counterintuitive to, I'm posting a remote role. Why do I have to be that specific?
That's a great question, Brett. It's one of the things I think candidates are very sensitive to in this environment. We think about candidate experience is sloppiness. And the second thing they're really sort of reticent about is companies not being transparent and clear about things. And this is where remote has meant now so many remote and hybrid post-pandemic has just taken on a spectrum of different meanings for candidates, right? We say we're remote, but are we remote? Are we going to go back to the office? Are we not going to go back to the office? And what does remote mean in terms of, do you have an appreciation for what it takes to hire somebody in Europe or in Asia or in Africa? And so specificity does a really good job for candidates, even if you specify it's remote. Providing cities does a really good job for candidates in specifying that you've done some homework, that you can hire from the city, that you can actually pay the salary bands that are competitive in the city, that you know and understand the benefits and requirements and all of these. What candidates hate is when they apply to a remote role and then they find out, oh, actually, we don't want to hire people from this geography, or actually, we don't want, we need you to have like work authorization for this other geography, or are we actually not going to pay competitive pay for that geography? And you may not be the employer doing this, but we're working in an environment where candidates have been gaslit so frequently that it starts really thoughtful, highly qualified candidates start to prioritize their effort and time where they feel like the companies know what they're doing, especially because search engines are so built with almost every search engine. There's a title and there's a location. Location is core to how candidates search for jobs. So provide multiple locations. And one of the really nice things about providing multiple locations in your job post. So the way to do this is if you've got most modern ATSs, allow you to have one rec with multiple job posts. So you have a single rec, you create multiple job posts for a few different locations. And it has a few really good advantages because the job posts get stale. They start to get lower qualified candidate pools over time. So you can turn off those and then open them up in other locations if you're remote. They all flow into the same funnel, the same pipeline that you can prosecute in one single way. So it allows you to be specific without having to make compromises. And that's our big tip. Post job specific cities. So we as the data people are a completely distributed company. We've hired people all over the world. But every time we post a job, we try to identify where are great talent markets where we might want to find candidates. They're hypotheses, and then we add more or less depending on the candidate pool that we're starting to get. That takes us to tip number 3. Qualifications should be market calibrated. Now, Brett, that feels unintuitive. Does this mean I should just add more qualifications?
In fact, it's the exact opposite. So qualifications, and we've all experienced it, right? You get a job post from a hiring manager, or you're working with a job requisition template that HR built out for internal purposes, and there are a litany of requirements. It starts to sort of be death march by qualification. And candidates are experiencing that today. But what many overlook, certainly I did frequently as a hiring manager, is that candidates view those qualifications almost as an internal checklist for themselves. And over time, the market holistically views those qualifications as a reflection on the employer brand. Are you reasonable? Are you rational? Are you specific? And so it's critical to understand what is market leading for qualifications. What does that even mean? And that differs depending on the role. It may also differ depending on the market. So the qualifications that you expose, and this gets back to tip 2, but depending on the market that you're looking at, the role might have perception-wise different qualifications. That doesn't mean that you should necessarily bend to those, but you need to be aware of what the market is expecting at a role level, at a candidate level, and also across your entire hiring spectrum, what those qualifications mean for you as an employer, how they influence your brand. And so, writing my job recs here at Data People was, first of all, an incredibly illuminating experience because I've written the same job post multiple times over in the past. And so, many times as a hiring manager, it's like, hey, this worked. I got a great talent out of it. You lose sight of how much work went into hiring. And so you're like, this works, let's put it in market. I learned a lot. I was able to improve my job post by taking in some of these market calibrations that look at not only what are the qualifications that this role specifically needs, but how do we express it in a language that the market appreciates, that will resonate with your intended target population and your talent pools that you seek to resonate with? So it's a really good question, and it isn't, let's go add 10 more qualifications to make sure that we fit the New York City market. It's understanding how the New York City talent population would see themselves in these qualifications.
That's right. It is a competitive talent market. In fact, we did a survey with our customers. We found that the companies that have the best recruiting outcomes, almost to a fault, tend to insist on bringing market data into the kickoff, the strategy meeting that they do with the recruiter, the hiring manager at the start of the role. And the reason they do that is because they recognize that we're hiring in the context of a talent market, and we have to be calibrated with that talent market. Now, sometimes, as Brett pointed out, they can be overqualifying a role that triggers the confidence gap, and we want to kind of dial down. We want to dial down that overqualification because counterintuitively, overqualification, not only does it not work, it actually deters. Our research has shown that when you add an additional preferred requirements to a job, you tend to get 50% fewer qualified candidates and 50% fewer candidates that are women or from historically underrepresented backgrounds. So it triggers these two things that hurt the quality of your candidate pool. What's happening there? People are self-select. The thoughtful candidates are self-selecting out of your pool, and you're basically getting the one-click applies who aren't reading the job. That's what we want to avoid. But there's another thing. With a lot of our jobs, we sometimes underqualify, especially with go-to-market jobs. You'll notice they'll add a single line and they'll have a lot of soft skills. And it makes, not only does this make it hard for candidates to thoughtfully self-select into the role, it makes it really hard for a recruiting team to properly assess different types of candidates that are applying for your role. And it puts a lot of burden on the process. So just why we rolled out nudges. What we like to do is, for like a marketing job, try to provide specific, tangible nudges of what the market is asking for, and encourage hiring managers and hiring teams to put this into their job description. So your jobs are specific, they're tangible, they're things that the candidates can use to appropriately self-select into your job's candidate pool.
Well, they're actionable. I think self-selection by your candidates is helpful, but they're also actionable for the hiring team. You get the entire hiring team on the same page with regards to what specifically do we need this candidate to bring to the table. And that is soft skills and things that mean something differently to candidates will mean something differently to your hiring team, which means that you will not be able to assess a singular, well-rounded representation of your candidates. You will get varying perspectives and an influx of opinion as opposed to more accurate and ultimately insightful reviews.
That's exactly right. So tip 4, turn off an effective source.
This seems obvious. Like, I mean, why wouldn't you do why would we even add this, right? There's 5 sources, source 4 sucks. Why even talk about this? You know, this is a fun one because we point this out, and it's one of those where it's very, very clear. You have to do this. However, as I've certainly experienced personally in marketing, the ability to do this is hard. It requires a level of precision instrumentation and also, to a degree, vulnerability. So it's not just, do I have the data to show that one of my sources is good or bad, but it's also, am I confident enough to make a decision on that source? It's very easy to postpone. It's very easy to say, well, it's early, right? We brought on a sourcer, it's early. They've only been on for 4 weeks. Let's give them another 4 weeks. It's really easy to say that. It's even easier to not even think about it. But what is hard is to get to not just what are they contributing to your pipeline, but what does that mean as you look at passer rates by source, as you look at hires by source, as you look at diversity by source. That is the hard part. And so for me, that was what was the big eye opener when I joined Data People, which is, if you go to the next slide, Amit, the accessibility of data. And that Amit joked about having a spreadsheet to look at. That was my experience as a hiring manager for many, many years was, hey, this is what I could get out of our ATS. Let's talk about how you look through it. And that is wholly unsatisfactory coming from marketing. And if you're not an experienced hiring manager, it's incredibly inaccessible to engage with versus what we have here shown on the screen, which is just a handful of representations of the types of data that you can see with Data People. But having an end-to-end platform that not only collects the data, but normalizes it, structures it, and then makes it accessible in representations that can drive everything from awareness to reporting to action. And I think for me, that's hugely motivating. And that really is that next major unlock for talent acquisition to really drive efficiency and drive equitability in a sustainable fashion.
One of the reasons it's very hard to understand if the source is ineffective is because of the nature of syndication that happens today. So when you post a job on your careers page, on your ATS, whether you're using Greenhouse or Lever or Workday, what happens is there's a whole slew of job boards and systems that are crawling your ATS and syndicating the job out into lots of different places where candidates can see them. And sometimes that happens without your knowledge. So this happened to actually a customer of ours, where they've been posting jobs and suddenly the pass-through rates plummeted. And they hadn't changed anything explicit. They were still advertising in the same places. They were still, their sourcing strategy had not changed. But they realized when we started, because we had access to reporting, you were able to investigate, you realized that there was a massive number of completely unqualified candidates coming in from a third-party job board that was clogging up and making it really hard for recruiters to sift through the resumes and really be able to prosecute the pipeline in time. And by knowing and understanding that this was all coming from this one source, they were able to sort of plug that leak, turn off the syndication to that source, and start to prosecute a much more systematic pipeline. But you have to have the right alerting that allows you to really systematically understand when this is happening and understand where it's coming from, especially in the distributed syndication environment that we operate in today.
I love that.
So
story.
with that,
it reminds me a lot of what we're trying to figure out in marketing, which is your homepage is a singular representation that gets re-represented and a variety of channels pushing traffic there. So that's exactly what happens with your job post. It is a singular representation that then in some cases you lose the opportunity to control the abstraction of that. And unless you have that depth of data and that accessibility of data, you might never know that syndication exists. And you might never be able to understand how to harness or eliminate it.
that's exactly right. So let's get to our last tip. Drum roll, please. Tip number 5, streamline screening fairly and efficiently. So this thing may seem obvious. You know, you've got your ATS, you're screening resumes, but here's the truth. With almost every single ATS, it's actually quite burdensome to go through hundreds and hundreds of resumes. And oftentimes, every resume is written very differently. It's formatted differently. Some PDFs don't render. Some PDFs are so heavy they take seconds to render. And it's a frustrating experience for the recruiter and the hiring manager. One of the things that forward-thinking recruiting teams do is they use knock-in and knock-out questions really effectively. So every one of your ATSs will typically allow you to construct a custom application form. A great example of a knockout question, you want to keep those very few and far between, but a great example of a knockout question is, do you have work authorization for this geography, whether it's US, wherever you're posting the job. If it's a remote job, you might want to be very specific about certain geographies that you work or you don't work with. So you allow people to sort of select, because if you're not in a position to hire them, then you should not be, they should get automatically filtered out. And that's also a really clear sign to them that no, we're not taking Hail Mary one-click applies. We're really trying to be thoughtful about this. We've also seen really good knockout questions that, especially in a world that's pay transparency oriented, where you're like, this is our salary range, acknowledge that you're looking at a job with the salary range so that you're not spending a lot of cycles prosecuting a candidate pipeline and then finding out that you actually have a meaningful mismatch on compensation late in the process. That can be very frustrating. Really good knock-in questions. And what the difference in a knockout question, a knockout question knocks a candidate out instantly, right? If it automatically disqualifies them, you might even set up an automation in your ATS so that if somebody answers the knockout question a certain way, they're kind of getting an auto rejection. They're not even making it to your candidate pool. A knock-in question works differently. A knock-in question might be a free text form, might be a question about sort of asking to describe a certain type of experience that they've had, that you use to not to screen candidates, but to surface up really thoughtful candidates. And we use these all the time. You'd ask a question like, if you're hiring a marketing role, describe, a specific type of, provide your portfolio or describe a specific marketing launch you did in a very similar context, in a B2B SaaS context. And it's okay if people don't fill it up. You're still going to prosecute those resumes. But if people fill them up thoughtfully and they give you some, they give you the portfolio, they give you some thoughtful data points, you can use that to really go beyond the resume and understand and maybe surface those candidates up quicker. And that lets you get to fidelity with highly qualified candidates quicker without having to schedule a phone screen or having to do those extra cycles with them. And really thoughtful candidates take the time to fill some of those knocking questions out and give you the ability to surface them up. It's often a lot better than them writing long cover letters and which is another unstructured way that you've got to sift through to make sense of it.
I love this one. And this is my first experience being both a candidate to work with knock-in and knockout questions, but also as a hiring manager. And it's saved a tremendous amount of time. It's also helped us refine how we represent the role to the market and shape the market's expectations for what the role needs. And that isn't to say that you won't get candidates that may not fit your profile with having these questions, but it does mean that when you do, it is very, very easy to identify them, sometimes without even having to fully and thoughtfully review the resume. So it allows you, to Amit's point, if it's a knockout question, it allows you an off-ramp to avoid doing any additional work. It tightens the feedback loop with the candidate, which is a big positive from the employer brand perspective. And it also saves your team valuable cycles. So it's amazing. It's very, very illuminating for someone who is first time dealing with these and big believer.
So that concludes our 5 tips. A little bit about Data People before we go. Data People is the hiring platform that helps companies build fairness and efficiency into their recruiting processes. Hundreds of customers around the world use us in 80 countries, and it has 2 big parts to the platform. There's an intelligent editor that recruiters and hiring teams collaborate to write great recruiting content, starting with market-calibrated, thoughtful job posts. And there's an analytics suite that lets you track every one of these metrics that matter to you and do meaningful work and not manual work. You should never have to touch a spreadsheet in anger. And you should be able to find things like pass-through rates right at your fingertips and have them at hand at all times. Data People is also the way hiring managers and recruiters collaborate, regardless of whether you use Workday or Link or an ATS or no ATS at all. In that intake meeting and beyond, how do we create beautiful collaboration and remove the friction that exists between recruiters and hiring managers when you're figuring out what to hire for, how to frame the job post, and beyond. Data people is used all over the world by some of the world's leading companies. Tens of thousands of professionals use us every day. And we help you gain intelligence and control over the entire hiring process. We integrate very, very closely with nearly every ATS and make that experience truly magical. It's why our customers, quarter after quarter, rate us as one of the easiest platforms, the highest ROI platforms, and a true leader in our space. So find out more. Let us show you a product, and be part of this journey. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar on 5 tips to instantly improve your inbound candidate pools. I'm Amit. I was joined with Brett. Thank you, and have a wonderful week.